turn that radicalism and that hope into transforming lives, increasing fulfilment and happiness for the many. That's what we're about. Equality through democracy, the definition of socialism. The transforming lives means, I suppose, before everything else, yes, having enough to get by, but not just to scrape by, also to live a rich and fulfilling life. And millions today, after 9 years of Tory austerity, millions today know how hard it is to do that, just worrying about getting to the end of the month. So transforming people's lives means ending the modern evil of in-work poverty.
Hi, I'm Josh Foster, and next to me is Jobe Doherty. Joining us tonight is the former Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, former 2007 Labour leadership contender, current member of the Socialist campaign group and the Labour MP for Hayes and Harlington since 1997, the Right Honourable John McDonnell MP. Hi John, welcome to Progressive Pod. How are you?
Often I get called Right Honourable anyway, but there you are.
We deserve to be anyway.
Should I tell you the story? Should I tell you the story behind that?
Yeah, go for it. Go on.
Well, we had, when you become members of the Shadow Cabinet or Cabinet, normally what happens is that you get offered the title of Right Honourable. But to get that title, you have to go and see the Queen and kiss hands and this sort of thing. And what happened, I said, to be honest, I'm not bothered about it. But then what happened is, I can't remember, it might have been, it might have been Syria or Lebanon or whatever, but what happened was, because I was not a Right Honourable, the security services weren't willing to brief me or include me in any briefings with Jeremy. So I said, this is ridiculous. And Jeremy said, this is ridiculous. He's the Shadow, you know, we make decisions as a collective, and he needs the information just as much as me, where it was a dangerous period. Anyway, in the end, he put his foot down and they made an exception. But after that, I said, look, I'll go and do the meet the Queen and all the rest and get it all done. And Jeremy said to me, I said, do I have to do the kissing of hands and everything? I don't, you know, I've met the Queen before. I toured around Hayes, actually, up Hayes Town Centre, and she was lovely. She was really nice and people liked to see her. And Jeremy said, oh, no, you don't have to do that. I just shook hands, don't worry. So I turn up at Buckingham Palace and we go to see the Queen and we go through the ceremony, and they've put two kneelers where you have to kneel on one, kneel on the other, and then kiss hands. And I said, I'll never trust you again, Jeremy, on ceremonies. Which actually she was very nice, obviously. She is like that as well. But I came away from it as the Right Honourable, but that was the only reason, because they literally would not provide us with security briefings without Privy Council status. You remember the Privy Council then, and yeah. That's it. So that's the reason. But when people call you Right Honourable, most of the Right Honourables I've known, certainly as Tories, where they're far from right and far from honourable.
Well, I tell you what, that's one for the storybooks. That all that fuss for one little title. I can't believe they were so picky over it. But you know, it's something you can laugh at, isn't it? But lovely to have you here, and lovely to hear that. And I'll get you started. So, first question is: obviously, you were Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, and your main brief will have been economic policy. And so, I feel like this is a good question for you. Do you think that the social ills of Britain today, whether that be through crime, culture, etc., all these divisions can be helped or even solved by progressive economic policy?
I come from a historical background, if you like, of understanding society on the basis of class. Mm-hmm. And on the basis of class, the way our society is organized on the basis of class, it means that you have, under capitalist system, extremes of wealth and poverty, grotesque levels of inequality. And it isn't just inequality of wealth, it's inequality of power as well. So what we find at the moment, and in my constituency, actually it's most probably, I've lived here now over 40 years. It's most probably the worst period, actually. It's even worse than the 80s, actually. I've got 42% of the children in my constituency are living in poverty. It's just staggering, really. It's just staggering. And I've been meeting with Ian Byrne today. Ian's a fantastic Liverpool MP. He's been doing the Right to Food campaign. And going all through my life, I've never been in a situation like this where we actually do have children who are going hungry on a regular basis, and it isn't a myth, this thing about, you know, parents having to choose whether they eat or the children eat. It isn't a myth. That's the reality of it. And what is shocking is you're seeing families like that, and in a constituency like mine, whereas they're in some would argue fairly decent jobs, their wages are so low that they don't, if you might, meet particularly their housing costs, because we've got such a housing shortage. So I think there is this issue about the social problems that we face at the moment are largely economic, but they're based upon the class nature of capitalism and the maldistribution of both wealth, but also of power as well. I say power, one of the most effective transfers of power in our society is when someone joins a trade union, because then you can negotiate from collective strength to have decent wages and conditions of work, that sort of thing. At the moment, what's happening in my constituency, it became one of the first constituencies where fire and rehire started. I've got Heathrow Airport in the constituency. BA, British Airways, our supposed national carrier, wanted to sack all its workforce, cut their conditions and their wages under fire and hire policy. Heathrow Airport then itself tried that one on, and then there's other companies as well. And I just thank Unite, the way they organised. We've fought a lot of that back and pushed it back. But it's been going through my area, like other areas, like wildfire. And it's undermining people's basic incomes and actually undermining working conditions as well. And I'm worried as a result of that what we're seeing is a sort of a revival of quite oppressive work experiences as well. So yes, there is an economic base to a lot of the issues that we face. And as a result of the economic system which we live under.
Yeah, I feel like you summed that up pretty well. And, I would expect you to, considering the kind of positions you've held in the past. But you did touch on trade unions there and how the power that workers have as a collective and working together is, when it's used, unprecedented, really. I mean, a lot of the history and the class struggle in modern Britain has been decided and fought solely by trade unions, and God knows where we'd be without them. But that makes me ponder on the question, this power that we get from trade unions, I mean, it should be a given, really. So do you think that our human nature almost, just as people, it kind of has a more socialist instinct or a more communitarian instinct than I think a lot of people realise?
I work on the basis that there is such a thing as humanity, and I actually do think that people want to live together, respect one another, and I think people want to. It's that Christian thing as well. You know, you want to be treated the way you want others to treat you, the way you treat them. You want to treat them the way they treat you, and it's that view that actually people do, I think, want a society in which we respect one another and we work cooperatively and collectively. And it's interesting, some of these very, very early debates and discussions about the development of society is that, you know, the idea that people came together as in families, of course, but they came together in groups because they realized that was the better way in which they could live and survive, whether it was, you know, going through the early stages of existence, whether it was just making sure they were safe together, they hunted together, they protected each other together. So there was that development of that collective form of organization of very basic society. And I think that still exists. And what's been interesting in this recent period during the pandemic, actually it has taught lots of people that actually we do care for one another. It's just remarkable how many people have just come out and assisted one another. But in addition to that, I think what it's taught people is that we don't just care for one another, we actually do need one another as well. And I think that there's something inherent within humanity, within human beings, that's there. It's interesting. Well, I've been doing this history of class struggle over the last 800 years. I've been doing this series of podcasts. And I've been bringing together, I chair the discussion, really. I ramble on too much during them, I'm afraid. But anyway, I bring these academic researchers together and some campaigners as well. And we talk about their specialist subject, their specialist period. So we did one around the Peasants' Revolt and that early period of revolt, from the Peasants' Revolt in the 14th century right the way to the early Tudor period, Kett's Rebellion up in Norfolk. And then the next one we've just done and put out there is the Civil War. And the next one is Chartism. We've just recorded that. And it's interesting, in all of those, you have people coming together to actually, it's interesting, they're claiming basic rights. So the rights are just their freedom, the right to have a decent income, the right to have a decent roof over your head, at least the right to live in a safe environment. And it's people coming together collectively to challenge existing powers, if you like, that are denying them those rights. And I think that's the history of our struggle. That's the history of our society. And I think the Marxian idea that all history is based upon the succession of class struggles is almost certainly true. And the whole concept of historical materialism that flows from that is a good way of analyzing society. I'm now going to do this series. We're going to go doing a few more of those on the history. I'm now going to do this series of podcasts where we invite specialists in to talk about the history of socialist thinkers in our society over the last 800 years or so. So, you know, the Peasants' Revolt was fueled by the ideas of people like John Ball. But then also, it's interesting, I want to do one on Thomas More and Utopia as well, because if you read Utopia, it's constructed effectively a communist society. And then you have Winstanley and the Diggers and all the rest of it. Anyway, I just think what we need to do now is understand that throughout British history, there's been this long thread of socialist thought that has mobilized people's thoughts, ambitions, ideas, and it's brought them together to create the society that we have now, but also to challenge the society that we had in each era.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of fed into the idea about socialist thinking and obviously how that's evolved over time. I mean, whether it's Kropotkin or whether it's Noam Chomsky, they've all kind of, able to be boiled down to the sense that community is stronger than the individual fighting alone. And I feel like that has a place in politics. And I wonder if you do as well, because through the past, a lot of wins that Labour have had as a party have all kind of come down to these bread and butter issues. So do you think there is something that the left can learn from pride in place, pride in work and pride in communities?
We've always been, if you look at the history of our movement, whether it's the trade union movement, whether it's the Labour Party, the Labour movement overall, or whether it's the earlier struggles, they've largely been based upon community. They've largely been based upon people coming together within their communities, feeling a sense of community, and then feeling a sense of communal power as well. And that, I think that's how we've developed. In sometimes we've lost our way on that as well, where we've engaged in, if you like, a form of politics that becomes distant from the reality of the people or our communities, the life that they live within those communities. And sometimes you can be distant from reality. So theory doesn't relate to actually what's actually happening on the ground. In terms of the Labour Party, I think what's interesting now, we're having this debate about the concept of place and the concept of community. I don't think we ever lost it. I don't think we ever lost it, but we need to maybe refocus it in terms of the greater priority about how we communicate about that. When I was Shadow, I'll just give an example really. When I was Shadow Chancellor, I toured around the country. Every other Saturday, I'd take my Treasury team out and we'd do seminars in towns all around the country. It was absolutely knackering, actually. We were traveling all over the country, getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning. But what was happening is we were bringing people together. And the first question we asked is, what's it like here? And we'd just say, I'd say, look, here's some statistics about this local area. You tell us what the reality is. And then we'd say, well, what are the issues that people need to be facing and confronting? Here's a menu of policies that we've been knocking around nationally, but would they work here? If not, why not? And in addition to that, what would work and what other ideas have you got? And we described it as community socialism, and some of the media had a go at us for it. But the idea was to try and rebase the Labour Party, based it back into that real sense of understanding local communities, but more importantly, transferring power and resources to those local communities. I was involved with Matthew Brown up in Preston years back when he first developing the ideas of community wealth building through the local authority. And that's just one aspect of that. So I think a lot of what we've always done traditionally, but we need to re-emphasize it now, is that socialism has always got to come from the grassroots. It's always got to come from the bottom up. And it will never succeed if it's an attempt to impose ideas from above. That's, the Labour Party was a social movement from the beginning, and we've got to make sure that we maintain that social movement aspect of democratic ideas developed and implemented at the grassroots level that then can be assisted by national government.
I think you did right, really. I mean, the Batley and Spen by-election showed us that when we are rooted in our communities and when we actually understand them, live and breathe them, that even in the face of division, there is, Labour can win. And I feel like that has to be play a much greater focus. And I think one thing we can all agree on is what's united England recently was the national football team. I mean, I just speaking very briefly, I have never felt as proud and patriotic as the England football team have made me feel, because, growing up, I've never felt a real motivator and an instinct of patriotism. But when, they've showed in the face of adversity what they can be, it's made me absolutely dead proud of the boys and, everyone behind the scenes, and also those people who weren't afraid to stand up to racism in its face. And I just have to ask, do you think there is anything we can learn, maybe specifically about progressive patriotism, that can unite not only England, but also Britain in like a winning coalition?
The thing about the England football team is that it reflected our society in terms of, it reflected the working class coming together of our society in terms of the team. It reflected the diversity of our working class communities, definitely. And I think that people just saw a team that reflected what they see around them in their own communities. And that was what was so marvelous about it. When the booing started, I tweeted out that this was racist. That's it, full stop. And then I was getting slagged off. You can't call these people racist. Yes, I can. And they were, when people took the knee, that was a racist. I think the booing was racist. And this idea, oh no, they weren't really booing them because they were taking the knee. It was because they were supporting the Black Lives Matter, which is a Marxist organisation. Well, to be honest, I didn't see Marcus Rashford and the others in a Marxist and Das Capital reading group at any time. It was a racist assault, basically, because for the first time for a period, people were getting out on the streets under the Black Lives Matter movement, largely young people, asserting that they wanted to live in a society that respected each other, whatever their ethnicity. And I thought that was the Black Lives Matter movement. I thought was a huge breakthrough. and it's still, and the momentum of it continues on now, which is great. So I thought, yeah, the team itself was great to see, and that brings together that sense of community, if you like. In terms of patriotism, I've never really completely understood what patriotism is. I'm always anxious about nationalism. You know, you want to be proud of where you come from, of course you do. Often you're proud of your ethnicity as well. My family are Irish, originally from Ireland. I'm from Liverpool, and so you have a bit of a pride. I'm a Liverpool Red. I support Liverpool football team. So you have all those sort of loyalties and commitments that you have, which is wonderful. But as long as it doesn't spill over into sort of a nationalism where you're looking down on others in some form, that's my main worry. And I think sometimes you get that at an England game. You do. There's no doubt about it. But what I thought was great as well, as the tournament progressed, the clapping got louder and the booing got smaller, and the vast majority were supporting the team and supporting them kneeling down as well. So I think that was quite a huge victory, really. And in terms of, I don't want to go on, Priti Patel and I have to watch my language. Priti Patel and Boris Johnson, their whole role was a disgrace. We knew what they were doing. You know, it was. Keir and the others have got it right. It was dog whistle politics going on from the Tories, and they've woken up now. Actually, they got on the wrong side of, effectively, our community, our people. And he'll try and dig himself out, just as he always has done. But you have to, I keep saying to people, you have to come to terms and understand that we have a prime minister who's a lying racist, full stop. You know, there's no, you have to call him out. And at the moment, I just don't think people have fully come to terms with the fact of the scale of the problem that we've got with this sort of prime minister and the team he's got around him. I'm old, you know, I'm getting on a bit. I've been in politics a long period of time. I've been representing my constituency now since '97, but before then I was on the GLC. Well, we've never seen anything like this. We've never seen this level of corruption in government before. And it is corruption. We should call it out as corruption. When you're handing out contracts to friends and family, that's corruption. And Open Democracy, Peter Gagan and that group in Open Democracy, the journalists, who I think are brilliant, you know, they were looking at the figures. Tory donors, for every pound that they give in a donation to the Tory party, they'll get at least 10 times that back in a contract from the government. So a donation to the Tory party at the moment from many of these companies isn't a donation, it's an investment in corrupt distribution of contracts. It's scandalous, it really is, you know. So I at the moment, I think we've got to try and wake people up to say, look, just on standards of common decency, we've never experienced this sort of government before. And if we're not careful, what it does, it takes the whole of government into that gutter. And we mustn't let this level of corrupt government and the lying that goes on and we mustn't let that become the norm. Otherwise, we're in a really dangerous situation for the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's my last question that I'll be asking you, but it does feel like the heart of government at the minute has this, and you can't really say this about many governments, but this is definitely one of them. It has a moral vacuum at its centre. It has no actual principles. It just kind of goes with the wind. It's this populist rhetoric that kind of puts the country in the gutter, really. And, you know, it is despairing, but, you know, at times like this, I think it's the responsibility of our party to kind of rise above it. It was Harold Wilson that said, that the Labour Party is a moral crusade or it is nothing. Do you agree with that? And do you think that's still pretty true?
I'm always edgy these days about using the word crusade, but there you are. But I agree. I'm a great admirer of Harold Wilson. I think he was completely underestimated. You know, the difficult circumstances that he was in, he held together with tiny majorities Labour governments. He did exactly the right thing with his cabinets. his cabinets were left, right and centre. You know, he brought it all together. Really rumbustious, but as a result of that, they got better decision making. So I have a lot of time for Harold. When I was a kid, I sent Harold Wilson a Christmas card. And I got a reply from Downing Street, not by him, but a civil servant wrote back. I've still got it. So I just admired the bloke, and since then, I think he's been completely underestimated. One of the sharpest politicians that we've ever had in the Labour Party as well. Really, really astute, brilliant brain, really. But I just think that the way in which we are at the moment, we as a party now have got to be standing up for everything that's right. You know, we've got to be standing up for decency. We've got to stand up for honest government. We've got to be standing up for respect for people. We've got to be stand up as anti-racist or whatever. And we've got to do that, I think, with a bit of emotion, to be honest, with a bit of anger as well. I get really angry at the Tories because it's all well and good going through these debates in Parliament, but then you come home and you see what their policies are doing to our communities. I get bloody angry, actually, and I think we need to express that now. I also think within the party as well, we need to understand much more theoretically what we're dealing with. I think people call the Johnson regime populist because of the Trump type association. It's proto-fascist. It's proto-fascist. What does that mean? It means it has those characteristics that if built upon, developed towards fascism. You know, first of all, apart from the lying, dishonest nature of it, the complete disregard of any form of democratic institutions, whether it be Parliament, whether it be the courts or whatever. But in addition to that, it has supporting it what is almost a groveling media. And if you put all those things together, a lying prime minister, someone who's corrupt, can't be trusted, has difficulty determining truth from lie, disrespect for Parliament itself, so no parliamentary accountability, at times willing to disobey the courts and undermine the rule of law as well, then alongside that, a groveling passive media, that's a dangerous cocktail for the future if we're not careful. Yeah. And if you see where it's happened elsewhere, those sorts of characteristics move towards quite an authoritarian government. And we're seeing that now. The police and crime bill that's going through at the moment comes from an extremely authoritarian government. The ability to actually prevent, to criminalize protest is quite staggering, really. In addition to that, what we're seeing this week is the health bill going through that lays the foundations for the next wave of privatization of the NHS. Then next week, we've got the nationality bill, nationality and borders bill, which will again will criminalize large numbers of people come to this country who are seeking refuge, that's all. So I think we're in quite a dangerous moment with this government, and that's why the opposition has to be, I think, much more assertive in Parliament, certainly, but the reality is a lot of the opposition is going to have to come from industrial struggles on the picket line, but in addition to that, people taken to the streets as well.
Yeah, well, that was brilliant from you, John, answering my questions. I was very, very happy with the robustness and really emotional intelligence with which you answered. I'm going to pass you on to Joshua's questions now.
This is more, personal, but could you explain how you felt personally to see Jeremy Corbyn, known as an outsider in the party, then he went to pick up a few nominations in the leadership election, and then he got elected with a massive majority to lead one of the biggest political parties in Europe. Could you explain how you felt and also what that meant for radical change in the country?
Well, people must probably know the story that I ran for leader twice, and so popular I couldn't even get on the ballot paper, So when Ed Miliband stood down, actually I didn't want Ed to stand down. I wanted him to stay there because actually he was quite a progression on from what we'd had before. And I thought tactically, if Ed stayed there, we might be able to, he did talk to the left, which we hadn't had before under Blair and not with Brown either. But I thought if Ed stayed on, we could have a dialogue and we might be able to secure some position for the left on the front bench in particular. To gain the new generation coming up, I wanted to then get experience of front bench work, etc. And we might be able to re-establish slowly the credentials of the left. Then he stood down. So then Jeremy and I convened meetings of the left forum, bringing together the left groups to try and persuade them that we didn't need to run a candidate because we'd get hammered and it'd be embarrassing. We'd show the weakness not of the left, not the strength. But, you know, it's the wisdom of crowds, really. People said, no, you need to do it. Someone's got to do it. And even if you only get a few weeks and you don't get the nominations, at least you'll be on the sofa on Mar for a couple of weeks, you know. So we went back to campaign group and said that people want to run. Who's going to do it? No point in me running after that. Done it twice. Diana just done it as well. She didn't want to do it. Jeremy was there. We went around the table and we said, Jeremy, you know, you're going to have a go. He said, okay. You know, it was like that. And then I said I'd manage I'd be the campaign manager. And literally then we just begged for nominations. And people never took us seriously at all. The one thing about Jeremy, he's such a nice bloke. He never falls out with anyone. You know, I couldn't get nominations because I was pinning people up against the wall saying, why have you voted for that? And things like that. You know, we having rows with people. So I tried to give them some ideology. But Jeremy, you know, just gets on with people, which is really good. So people just said, okay, I'll nominate him. Why not? We can have a debate, that sort of thing. At least we'll have a debate. And I think there was a general view there should be a candidate from the left, if only to have that debate about range of policies. And so we got Jeremy on the ballot paper on the last seconds before nomination closes. And I've done so many deals and phoned so many people around it. So anyway, we got him on. And then when we started off, he was seen as a joke candidate. You know, he was 200 to 1 against him winning. I'm the only person who never put a bet on it. Some of our campaigners did and had a fantastic holiday at the end. But he was seen as a joke candidate and that sort of thing. That benefited us a little bit because it meant the media didn't attack us immediately on the scale that they eventually did. So there was sort of, he's not going to run, you know, he's a non-runner, horse with no regs, you know. So they left us alone a little bit. And then we had the first televised debate and Jeremy walked the floor. It was just brilliant, you know, because what happened was people were getting up and he just answered it straightforwardly. You know, this is what I believe in. And people just thought, thank God we've got somebody who just tells it like it is, and someone who you might not agree with everything he says, but he believes it and he's honest and decent. So his character came across. I remember one of the first questions was in the first televised debate, I think was from a firefighter. And it was just very straightforward about cuts and privatisation. And Jeremy laid it on the line. And the other candidates, I'm not disparaging them, the other candidates were just iffy. It was more of the same sort of thing. And remember, we'd just gone through, Ed had stood down, Harriet Harman stood in as the leader for a period, and we'd just gone through a debate in Parliament about the welfare cuts. And we basically said, look, you can't support any more cuts on welfare. You've got to go, you know, got to go for these Tories. And Harriet and the others, the leadership said, no, we should abstain. I said, no way. And I spoke in Parliament. Then I said, I'll swim through vomit to vote against this bill. I'm going to vote against it. And a small group of us did. And in some ways, that set the scene for the leadership election campaign, because people then thought, actually, he's standing up for something I really believe in. He's got the courage to do that. No more sitting on the fence, no more abstaining. We've got to pin our colours to the mast. And so it built like that. And then as the media start taking us seriously, then the attacks started coming. But we had almost the first month of free reign. And remember, virtually every other day we were pushing out policies. We'd put out policy paper in the morning, and by the next morning we'd have 50,000 responses. It was unbelievable. So we were building a policy program that was quite attractive to people. Then about a number of weeks in, Tony Blair came out and attacked us. That was most probably the best thing that could possibly happen, because that immediately mobilized people as well and motivated people. And then as we moved towards the end, it looked as though we were going to win fairly clearly. All the young people who are doing our technology and social media and the analysis were coming in with figures for me, none of which I believed. And I thought, I can't believe we're going to win by that many, but actually they got it exactly right. So when the figures came in and we knew we were winning, then it was trying to then put together a shadow cabinet as rapidly as possible. And then on the morning of, it was at QE2 Hall in Westminster, we go into the sort of green room. We're told that we'll get the ballot results told to us before we go in, and Jeremy goes on the platform. They came in and it was overwhelming success, lots of people in tears and things like that. And all the other candidates were very nice, came across, congratulated Jeremy, and then went in and Jeremy spoke. And I was elated. I thought this huge breakthrough, but also there's a level of seriousness as well. What have we taken on here? We've done a lot of preparation over this last 8 to 12 weeks, but there's a hell of a challenge. And remember, when Jeremy spoke and did his speech after the result, on BBC, they had a little sort of ticker thing running along, and it was the names of Labour MPs who were resigning from Shadow Cabinet and refusing to serve. And I thought, it wasn't good behaviour by any means. And that actually shaped my attitude towards Keir, because when we stood down, I said to Jeremy, we must never allow any of our side to treat Keir the way we were treated. You never agree or disagree, but you should never, ever do that, because the Parliamentary Labour Party, quite a lot of them were quite vicious towards us, for a period. And we never, I said to Jeremy then, look, Keir's won democratically. We should support him because he's won the democratic election of the leader, exactly as the sort of support we were expecting. So we mustn't ever replicate what the right wing did to us. And that's it. And then Jeremy did his speech, and the first thing he did then is there was a demonstration outside in support of refugees going on in Parliament Square. So we went and addressed that, which was just symbolic of what we were all about.
As you touched on Corbyn there and getting in, providing radical change for the country, you were Shadow Chancellor for the whole of Corbyn's tenure as leader. What were your 5 favourite economic policies that you proposed to the country, or indeed the party, and why?
Okay. I suppose the whole strategy, the economic strategy, was straightforward, benign. A redistribution of wealth and power, an irreversible shift in the wealth and power in favour of working people. So what does that mean? It means trying to secure democratic control of our economy to enable us then to redistribute that wealth and power. And that meant also recognising that in addition to redistributing wealth and power to tackle inequality, we also had to recognise as well that looming over us was the existential threat of climate change as well. So the whole package that we were putting together took all those factors into account, but also recognised that we were living in an economy that since the 1980s had been dominated by finance capital, what effectively now is, financialisation, but effectively what, Guy Standing and others have written books around rentier capital. And that's the nature of the society that we had. So first of all, we had to look at how do we democratize our economy in a way in which, as I say, we can secure the investment in the long-term stable investment, tackling climate change, but make sure that actually the benefits come to working people themselves. And in that way, we give people, we provide them with the opportunity of a really good quality of life. So things that were policies that people may not have thought were directly economic policies were absolutely critical. So the first one was trying to wake up the whole of our movement to the existential threat of climate change. Every decision, I was trying to say to people very early on, every decision we make has got to be made in that context. So the development of the Green New Deal from its earliest stages to a much more thorough and thought out project was absolutely key. So I think that's one of the key elements of it. And the person who's never really got the thanks or the attribution for all of this is Rebecca Long-Bailey. She was my number 2 in the Treasury team. And then we put her into Bays, and she was just brilliant. She developed all this. She's a good young lawyer who articulate, but also with a really good eye for the vision for the future, but an eye for detail as well. So she just steering us through to the point where we inherited a party that was in favour of fracking. You know, that was a classic example. I was going on to fracking site protests and things like that. So just to develop the Green New Deal, where we overcame those sort of initial obstacles and then looked at the long-term investment that was needed, was absolutely key. So she toured round. We just heard Boris Johnson, you know, celebrating that we've got a battery factory. Becky had outlined the battery factories that we need. She'd looked at the sites where they were going. It was that level of detail. So I think the Green New Deal has to be there as the sort of central focus of all of that. The second element of that, which was not much lauded, but how do we come to terms with harnessing finance capital in some form? And there was an advisor I brought in who'd been working with me over the years, a young guy called Graham Turner. And he has his own company in the city. They advise, they do projections and things for hedge funds about future issues, etc. And I would bring him in every other week. He'd give us an analysis of what was happening in the city, the issues that we're facing. But more importantly, we commissioned him and a whole team of people to do the work about how do we ensure that we get the delivery, not just of state capital, but finance capital, private finance capital, and deliver that into the Green New Deal agenda. And he did a huge review of the Bank of England and the finance sector, again, which was interesting because at that point, Mark Carney was the governor of the Bank of England, and he was shifting onto this agenda as well. So again, an unsung hero, Graham, and the turn and the work that he did, but it does lay the basis for the way in which, in addition to state funding, you can harness to a certain extent, sometimes by way of regulation, not always by incentives, but the finance capital as well. The next area, therefore, then, was what do we do about democratic control of some of those key areas of the economy that would assist us in terms of the Green New Deal? And that was about the development of alternative models of ownership. And one of them was obviously straightforward public ownership, nationalisation, but on a new level, a different way, much more democratic, ensuring that it was in the hands of these sectors, were in the hands of the workers, the providers, if you like, and those also consumers, passengers, whatever. So that third area of public ownership was key to us. And within that, we were always looking out, where do we have to go next? Of course, rail has to be brought back in. Energy and water, especially water, is such a rip-off privatization. But at one of those local community economy meetings, seminars I did up in Thelma Walker's constituency, someone actually raised the issue of broadband and how poor it was, and they were losing jobs because of it, and how expensive it was. And we did an investigation with the CW, the union, of the government's policy, where they were going to throw $5 billion at the private sector to deliver and get a poor service in return. And we thought, why should they profiteer of that? So why not universal free broadband? So it was new ideas coming on all the time. That was around public ownership. The other aspects then was, what do you do about making sure that people can get the jobs that we need, the high-skilled, high-paid jobs that we need? And that had to be investment in education, so the National Education Service, but also taking the tuition fees off students' backs as well. So scrapping tuition fees was there. And actually, that was a bit of a battle. There were some who never prioritized. Angie Rayner didn't want to do it, first of all, and was not keen on it. She wanted to provide resources for early years and that sort of thing. And I said, well, we'll do both. We'll find the money for early years as well as tuition fees, etc. But a lot of it I was trying to push was investment in skills training as well, more effective skills training. So in other words, that would provide us with the workforce, but at the same time, it would really give people the opportunity of creative jobs and professional jobs that, in terms of technical professions that we needed. That would be exciting. Then I suppose the next one, the final one, was I was trying to get across as well that by developing our economic ideas, what we've got to do is make sure that we set them in a global context. So we used to do an annual conference, an annual State of the Economy conference, looking at the British economy. But I also started then doing global discussions and seminars. So how do we, as a leading economy, then work with others across, particularly the global south. And we did some good work on all of that. So I was developing the, if you like, a sort of global strategy, particularly around reparations, but linked to the Green New Deal. So that would be technology transfer, etc., so that we could work together in the global south to tackle climate change. So, because obviously, if you don't do it, address it globally, you will fail individually, nationally. So that was the sort of range. It's quite a comprehensive range. What was great about it, as I set up all these advisory groups, and people were buzzing. We just opened the doors, and people were absolutely buzzing with ideas. We had all this new generation of young economists and others coming in, saying, "I've had this idea for this. What do you think?" And we just set up an advisory group and work it up. If it was a runner, fair enough. If it failed, well, at least we tried. Things like how do we develop the cooperative sector in our economy? We said we'd double it, and we had a working group of cooperators, really experienced people, looked at international models, said, right, that's the way we develop it. And then we thought, well, actually doubling the cooperative sector is pathetic, really, in comparison to what goes on elsewhere. How can we scale it up so much more? And people are buzzing with ideas like that. Now, one of the things that I get attacked for in the losing the last election, which I take blame for, is that, that manifesto that we had was too full of policies, and actually it was seen as lacking credibility. The most important thing is not to learn that lesson, but to learn the lesson that actually, if you are producing all these policies, you need time to bed them down. And in the normal run of things, we wouldn't have had it, but for Brexit, we wouldn't have had an election in 2019. We would have had it 2022, that sort of thing. So I think you need a couple of years to bed a policy down. That's one of the lessons. It's one of the things I've been saying to Keir and his people. They're doing the policy review now, but you can't leave it till late next year. You need those ideas bubbling up now, and you need to be consulting and bringing people along with them. Just turning up an election with a policy program and you haven't engaged with people on that policy program means that actually it lacks credibility.
Exactly. And I think you touched on earlier that you work with advisors and you actually listen to the people. And I think that garnered a lot of support and attention, and especially inspired quite a lot of people. Now, I'm not old enough to remember what Brown and Blair offered. I mean, they did some good things, national minimum wage, trade union rights. But I think Ed Miliband was slightly to the left, obviously, of Blair and Brown, but also he was also like a continuity candidate also.
He was hidebound by circumstances as well. Yeah. He had balls as his Shadow Chancellor. It wasn't his choice, so he was hidebound by the Parliamentary Labour Party, and he couldn't break out of that. But to give him his due, he was one of the first in government. He was one of the first people raising climate change issues, and that was against a torrent of vested interest as well.
That's a good point, actually. Yeah, and I think Corbyn coming out as strongly opposed to, austerity cuts, and that really resonated with people and inspired them across the country. And it's what led to a great success in 2017. I mean, that's the first time I've ever felt, truly inspired to go and, obviously I wasn't old enough to vote, but out on the streets campaign, and we had a vision, we had something to believe in, and we could try and communicate that with people, and people were on board with that, which, we couldn't have done in the recent local elections. I mean, I was knocking doors, but I didn't really know what to say when people asked me, policies. But obviously 2019 wasn't a great success. Do you have something that you would have done differently? You mentioned embedding policies. Is there anything?
I think between 2017 and 2019, Brexit was the issue. We couldn't get away from it. And there's lots of criticisms of all of us around the Brexit issue, but I don't know what else we could have done, really, because when you look at it, our party was overwhelmingly opposed to Brexit. 17, we accepted it, but nevertheless, I looked at all the polling. It was quite interesting all the way through. And even in constituencies that we lost, there was still, most of the Labour vote was still anti-Brexit. It was quite remarkable. So we were in that dilemma. If we moved more towards supporting a Brexit position, we'd lose out the Remainers. And if we moved more to the Remainers, we'd lose it. It was a nightmare situation. And it was so, that's the first thing. The second thing as well, you've got to remember that there'd been 4 years, nearly 5 years of character assassination of Jeremy, which was appalling. I've never, ever experienced. They did it to Kinnock, they did it to Michael Foot, but nothing on the scale they did to Jeremy, really. So by the time we got to 2019, the biggest mistake we made is between 17 and 19. We never had a strong enough narrative about what we were about. We had all these individual policies, but never really well together. You're right, in 17, we'd had a couple of years of campaigning as the anti-austerity party. And people were exhausted with austerity by the time they got to 17. After that, you needed a much more stronger narrative. And even when we tried stuff around the NHS, people still came at it via Brexit, you know. You say, you know, the Tories will never save, the NHS will never be safe in Tory hands. Then people would come back and say, oh yeah, but they're going to get 300 million a week or whatever it was, you know, more. So I don't think we had a strong enough narrative between 17 and 19, and I think that's our biggest failure. I ran the GLC campaign when I was on the GLC, and I spent a large amount of money on the campaigning at the GLC, and we had creative agencies, we had a proper, really professional pollsters, and we did focus groups as well. With our focus groups, though, we didn't go along and say, what do you want us to say? We used to go along with our policies and say, how can we convince you about these? What language do we use? We also had community organizers then at the same time, and we had an extremely strong media team rebutting and at the same time promoting. I don't think we fully replicated that effectively between 17 and 19. So I think that's a really strong lesson. But sometimes, you know, contingency, sometimes you're up against a wave hitting you that maybe you can't overcome. And the Brexit issue hit us hard, and it was such a dilemma. And again, I don't blame anyone for that. I take the blame myself. I think in terms of when you lose an election like that, you have to take it on the chin. But this issue about making sure you've got a vision that you're communicating and a program of policies that you can demonstrate will achieve that vision, you need time to do that. And that's what I'm saying at the moment to anyone who will listen to me, really, in terms of the Labour Party leadership, is you need to be doing that now. Don't leave it till 12. I had a session with Annalise Dodds, who I have an awful lot of time for. From what I hear, the timetable of the policy review is a report to this year's conference, then by the spring, a more detailed report, and then sometime after that, that will feed into the manifesto. I was saying it's a bit late. You've got to create a climate of opinion. It's the old Gramsci thing, isn't it? Hegemony. You've got to win that battle of ideas, and you do that now. You don't leave it till later.
Exactly. I'd say the one thing I wouldn't say to Keir Starmer is to move away from the policies 2019, because they were popular, and some people do say they were like a couple of years too early, because after the pandemic now, especially the universal broadband, that would have been amazing to the children up and down the country that needed, you know, broadband to study online. So I think
this is the irony, isn't it? If we'd have been in power from 17 onwards, even with the pandemic, we would have had the NHS investment. We would have our social care, National Social Care Service up and running as well. We would have had all that economic. The other issue as well is about, and this is a good point that Annalise made when she was part of my team, the pandemic hit people health-wise, but it also hit them financially, because there was no financial resilience amongst working people. They were still, you know, one paycheck away from finding themselves in real financial difficulty. We would have had a number of years of decent wage levels, and at the same time trade union rights, so they would have had a greater financial resilience as well to be able to manage all of that. That's the tragedy in all this. But all the policies we did at the time, what's interesting, individually they polled very well. Broadband polled incredibly well individually, but you put them together and bump, 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 people think, well, if you haven't convinced them they're all part of a program that will achieve that vision, and it's a realistic vision, people just don't believe you. That's the problem. That's what hit us in 2019, you know. The other one, ironically, I've been dealing with it this week. I said we would sort out the WASPy women's pensions, you know. And someone on Twitter had a go at me this week and said, oh, we did nothing for the WASPy women. I said, hang on a minute. So I don't usually reply to this. So I went back, I said, hang on a minute. Yes, I did. We had a policy.
Manifest.
And then she came back and said, oh, it was miserly. I said, it was £58 billion. Oh, it wasn't for a 5-year period. And then I didn't get nasty, but I did swear, what has Boris Johnson offered you when he promised you he'd sort it? And he didn't, But it's things like that. You learn the lessons from that, don't you, really? And as I say, you have to take it on the chin and move on. That's the whole point.
Exactly. Now, back to your youth or indeed life. Are there any particular moments, throughout your life or your youth, which shaped the way you thought or advanced your socialist ideology?
I think I feel I've always been a socialist. I was very, very briefly, very because it's boring. I was born in Liverpool. I was born off the Scotland Road. My mum was a cleaner. My dad was a Liverpool docker. So we lived effectively in what was a slum area. But none of us knew that. We were just working people. We thought everyone lived like this. We didn't feel as though we were going without as well. That was interesting because everyone was just the same. Moved south to where my mum came from in Norfolk, and I brought up in a council estate. I went to local schools, then went to a grammar school. I made the mistake of suggesting I might want to become a Catholic priest, so I then went off to a Catholic boarding school and with the De La Salle brothers, which was sort of a form of Christo-sadism, really. I want to say there's a Sado-Christianity would knock us about quite a bit. Came out of that, but when I left school, then I went on the shop floor. And so my experiences are all around that. And I was active in trade unions. My dad was a trade unionist as well. And then I think I never wanted to be a politician or trade union officer or anything like that. I wanted to be. I did my A-levels at night school again. I went to university at Brunel because it was a sandwich course. I had no idea about universities. But when I came out of Brunel, I wanted to be a manager in industry. I wanted to be a manager of the co-op. I wanted to demonstrate I could turn the co-op into the most efficient organ, and I couldn't get a job. I'd go along, and I think in interviews, they'd think I was balmy. I'd be going on about all this wonderful ideas for the co-op. So then I fell into a job with the NUM and National Union of Mine Workers, and then at the TUC. But I think the most influential period was that grassroots activity within my local community, where we were campaigning for tenants' rights or the law centre. And even then, we were doing, my local party here would do reading groups as well. We'd work with the Workers' Education Association and bring lecturers down. And it was a period in the 70s and then into the 80s of intensive political struggle. The miners' strike. I was on the GLC. So I think that was the formative period of real working class solidarity and struggle coming together. And the GLC was just, well, looking back on it today, it was halcyon days. I chair of finance. I had complete control of London's budget. I could raise the rates to whatever I wanted. Business rates, they were uncontrolled. Capital schemes, I just had to get a bill through Parliament. Even under the Tories, they wouldn't deny us the money. We built the Thames Barrier, and we finished it off. When I used to do Shadow Chancellor, I was doing meetings in the city, and there was sort of skepticism: has he ever done anything? I'd say to them, if it wasn't for me, you'd all be swimming at the moment, because we finished the Thames Barrier on the GLC. So it was that period of intensive class struggle, I think, influenced me more. But also, it was linked to quite a lot of reading, study, but communal. When I was at the TUC, I organised a capital reading group in the basement of the TUC, and we met once a week to read Capital, that sort of thing.
Wow.
It was amazing stuff. Really. So it's that sort of intensive period, and it was learning from people, learning from others who were involved, the trade union leaders, Labour MPs, but also more importantly, community leaders as much as anything. And when I mean leaders, I mean people who just said, there's something here, I'm going to do something about it. That was it. I think that was when the earlier questions about community and all the rest, that's the sort of socialism we're about. It is community socialism. It is about that grassroots activity. And I think we've got to respect that as well,
And we can see you've still got passion, for socialism and radically changing the country. You mentioned that you've ran for Labour leadership 2 times before. Now, we've got to ask you, John, there's been mention of the SCG trying to garner support for its members, but, after the 2024 general election.
True. It's not true, honestly. Yeah. What happened is before Batley and Spen, there was a feverish atmosphere in Parliament. And there was some, it's obvious, the Rayner camp, the Nandy camp and all that. And obviously feelers were being put out about what happens if, and the challenge to Keir and all that sort of thing. But actually in the Socialist campaign group, that wasn't the issue. Never came up in that sense, we weren't plotting or anything like that. It wasn't the time.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. There wasn't the mood for it amongst, we didn't think, the Parliamentary Labour Party or the wider movement. In addition, and of course, it's true, on the numbers, you need, it's, 10 or 12% of the PLP need for nominations or anything like that. And the numbers would have been difficult if we were going to run a candidate anyway, unless Keir resigned. It's a lot less than that. But no, that wasn't the focus, actually. The focus was much more, I think, much more sophisticated discussion about where do we go from here, almost to save this party, because we're looking down the barrel of another bloody Tory government if we're not careful in a few years' time. So it was much more serious discussion about, first of all, where are we really at in terms of electoral support? Where are we really at in terms of movement? Because we're losing members hand over fist at the moment. And then thirdly, where are we at in terms of really democracy within the party? And therefore, how do we address that? The general view, of course, well, the ultimate view is the Labour Party is still the best vehicle for socialism that we have in this country. So what we've got to do is make sure that vehicle is really effectively addressing the issues that our communities face around the development of policy, but organisation on the ground. So how do we seriously go about that and not get into sort of adventurous tactics of slagging off the leader, challenging that sort of thing, but to do anything that we do has got to be serious, and it's the Ben thing again, and it's got to be policies, not personalities. Do it that way. So that was the discussion. What then happened was there was all stuff in the media about we were plotting, and most of us weren't engaging in the media up until then around any of it. We thought that's irrelevant, don't get dragged into it. But a few times I and others then went out there and said, this is ludicrous, calm it down. But in the Parliamentary Labour Party, they're plotting all the time. It's like, someone said, is it like a bit like Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, the assassination? I said, no, it's more like Up Pompeii, farce. Up Pompeii is an old Frankie Howard TV program you won't know about, but it was farce. Absolute farce.
But say, we look down the barrel of another Tory government and then it happens in 2023, 24. Would you ever rerun? I mean, you are the most pragmatic member of the Socialist.
No, I won't. But what we've got to do now, and this is as much to Keir as much as anyone else as well, we've got to go into this next election confident that we can win. I still think we can. I think at the moment you'll see the polls narrow a little bit now because the support that Johnson has got is very fragile. It's broad, but it's not deep. So once people start seeing through, and we've got to be more aggressive in taking him on. We've really got to. We've got to harness the emotional energy of the British people about when they think something is wrong. Not when people were behaving badly, when people don't have standards of decency, and that's what Johnson. It's not about his sex life or anything like that. It's just the way he treats people, the way he's corrupt, the way he lies, and actually the way in which surreptitiously he's undermining all those essential wins we've had over our history, the NHS, investment in education, and also the way in which he's putting us at risk as a result of climate change as well. If we've got to be really focused on that and really go for them now, not allow them to get away. And the other issue then is the mainstream media are never going to be our friends. They'll always attack us and all the rest of it. We've got to keep on developing our own media and be that much more skillful and effective at that. And on that basis, I think we can win the next election. The key issue for me on the left is to be bringing forward rapidly the next generation. I regret that Rebecca Long-Bailey didn't win the leadership election. Her campaign, she'll admit it wasn't brilliant or anything like that. and it didn't really get across what she's like and what she's all about. But that generation of Becky and Richard Bergen and the others has now been joined by the Bell Ribeiro Ades, Apsana, by Zara, and all of those, and just phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. People like Olivia Brake and Rachel Hopkins. There's a whole group of them that are coming through now. Kim, Kate Osborne did a brilliant debate today on Colombia. So all of them, we've got to bring those through rapidly. If I was Keir, I'd be putting more of them on the front bench now so they get that experience, because they're dynamic, they've got guts and they've got principle, but actually most of them, well, all of them are really, I think for their years, quite experienced and extremely well read as well. So I think they can put theory and practice together in a way that maybe some of us haven't done effectively in the past. So I'm more optimistic now about the future than I have been for quite a while, because we've got that new generation coming through. And that new generation that is coming through is actually so much more better linked to their generation outside of Parliament and on the streets and elsewhere, you know. I'm optimistic, but no, I will be running. But what I want to do is make sure that we create such a climate of opinion that whoever is the leader of the Labour Party actually is adopting those policies and that analysis. But then also there's such much better collective leadership of the Labour Party with this new generation coming through, you know.
That's perfect. Thank you, John, for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. It's been absolutely amazing. Any final thoughts or?
Well, sorry I was late.
I know, I sent the email to the wrong person anyway.
No, it's me. It's my chaos. That's why they call me the late John McDonnell, to be honest. That's the whole point. Final thoughts of these is one of our jobs now is to give people confidence in the Labour Party again. Jeremy never does this, but I do. I start confronting people. Those people said, I've resigned because of the Keir Starmer or whatever. I said, well, you're deserting. And people have a go at me for it, but I have to be honest with people. If you leave the Labour Party now, you're deserting the struggle. You're leaving us behind. You weaken the left within the party. You undermine socialism within the party. So there's no excuse for leaving the Labour Party now. Other movements or other activities are great. We'll all do those. But when it comes down to it, all the social movements we're involved in, they will all rely upon at one stage the role of the state. And the only way that we can use the state is by going in and against it, changing the state relationship. And the way that you can do that is winning elections. And the best vehicle to do that at the moment for socialists is the Labour Party. I can't see any other route through. So the issue for us now, I think, is almost headhunt those people who've left and say, let's have a conversation about getting you back in and what your role is. And then also recruiting like mad the new generation that's coming forward. In that way, I think we've got real hope. So that's what I think we're all about. They're my final thoughts for what they're worth. And if anyone's still awake after listening to all of this, I hope that's what they'll do.
But thank you, John. It's been amazing. Thank you very much.